I'm commandeering this mic. Sorry. This is mine now, at least just for the time being. Until next week when I find my actual mic. I don't know where it went, but we'll get it taken care of. Well, I'm back. I don't know if you guys noticed. I survived my 4 weeks pretty much with the Army. I have not been here in 1 whole month. So I am happy to be back. It was a very long, interesting 4 weeks. I'm just going to throw it out there. We had all kinds of fun adventures. I'll kind of briefly catch you guys up to speed. This wasn't originally going to be my introduction, but I just recently thought of something that totally works. So it's fine. So we were doing Army stuff. I was playing Army. I had my annual training, and it was a very interesting roller coaster. There was a lot of ups, there was a lot of downs. I learned a lot as a chaplain. I grew a lot as a chaplain, which, interestingly enough, helps me also as a minister, as a pastor, as somebody who wants to go and proclaim the gospel to people who are lost. As well as how to take care of the needs of people who are not so lost, but sometimes temporarily feel a little lost at times and feel like they've kind of gone out to sea. So the car ride, for lack of a better term, was really interesting. We went all the way to Wisconsin, which if you do it in a normal car can take you 6-ish hours, 6.5, somewhere in there. It only took us about 2 days. So we were crammed in these vehicles, in Humvees, driving for 2 whole days. It was a fun time. We were going like no more than 45 miles an hour when everybody else was going like 75, 80. It was a great time. It was not dangerous in the slightest. There were no problems, except for like flat tires and oil leaks and, a lot of problems. So other than a lot of problems, we didn't have any problems getting there. So that was a fun time. I got there, and for the most part, I thought, this is going to be pastor vacation. That's really kind of what I thought. Yes, I was there to do chaplain stuff, but in my head, I was like, what kind of chaplain stuff am I really going to do? Take care of fake dead people is really what I was thinking was going to be happening, right? Because for the most part, I went into this training and I knew that there were going to be fake casualties. They were going to be handing out cards to people and saying, you have this wound, you have this wound, you've been KIA, you've not been, I knew that I was going to be dealing with that kind of stuff. What I was not prepared for was to deal with soldiers who actually had real world situations going on. I was not prepared for that in the slightest. I was not prepared to deal with soldiers who were going through really bad depression and were considering taking their own life. I was not prepared to actually deal with that. It's something that I always knew was I know that stuff happens, but in my head, right, I was like, I'm only here for 3 weeks. Surely that's not going to happen. It did. I was dealing with a lot of soldiers who had lost loved ones while we were out there, and we had some units from Puerto Rico. So they flew all the way to Wisconsin from Puerto Rico for this training, and we had some of those people lose loved ones all the way back home in Puerto Rico. And so they are, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles from their loved ones, and working with them and speaking with them, and I got to do my fair share of counseling with them. Honestly, in the past 3 weeks, I did more counseling than I've probably ever done in my entire life. And so the event really challenged me in a lot of ways. It really strengthened me in a lot of ways. It really tore me down in a lot of ways. I'm so happy to be here and eating real food. It's fantastic. I can't even lie. So for those of you who don't know, I was pretty much living off of what the Army calls MREs. Now, MREs, it stands for Meals Ready to Eat. It's a fancy Army cool way of saying Chef Boyardee and Campbell's is really kind of That's like a fancy way of saying that. I ate more like Chef Boyardee level ravioli than I've ever eaten in my life. It was a very interesting time. And so on our way back, we stopped at a gas station, and I got this cheeseburger from the gas station. I'm not talking one of those fancy gas stations with a McDonald's. I'm talking like gas station hamburger. And I took one bite, and I was like, this is the best thing I've ever eaten in my life. I was like, there's no food on the planet better than this cheeseburger right now that cost me $3 that somebody cooked in the back of this gas station. And I don't know if it would even pass health inspections if we're just being honest. But it was the best thing I've ever eaten. But I started to get kind of homesick. Ta-da! Segue. It counts now. I started to get homesick, and I started to miss, good food. And I'll be honest, we got back early. We got back to St. Louis 2 days earlier. And in my head, because I'm naive and I don't know how the government operates yet, I was thinking I get to go home 2 days early. I did not. They were like, you're on orders. You're staying here in St. Louis until we're done. And I was like, okay. So I was really hoping maybe I'd be able to leave and I'd, sneak into the back of church last Sunday and be like, surprise, I'm here, but I'm still not going to do my job, but I'm definitely going to eat the food for the luncheon afterwards. That's what I was hoping was going to happen. It didn't. I had to tear down tents and, wash stuff, and it was a fun time. Still being with the Army. But I'm happy to be back, and I'm really happy to go to the Rustic Garden after, which I know I talk about the Rustic Garden a lot. I can't tell you how excited I am to actually eat there for the first time after a month of, eating Chef Boyardee and Campbell's, okay? So, please just bear with me. If I start talking a lot about food, one, it's not that different than it normally is, and two, just let me have it. Okay, so anyway, we are getting into a new sermon series now that I've talked way too long about the Army and eating Chef Boyardee, and you probably never thought that you would hear Chef Boyardee so many times in a sermon, but here we are. We are starting a new sermon series going through Homesick. Now, the reason that I titled it Homesick is we're going to be looking at the book of Daniel. So in the book of Daniel, which if you guys are familiar with, Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego with the fiery furnace, if you're familiar with some of those stories, you know kind of where this is going, right? So we're going to be looking and talking about some of those stories. But the entire point of the book of Daniel is that they are now in exile. So all of the nation of Israel, they have been exiled. They've been kicked out of their hometown, out of their land. And what ends up happening is there's this guy who's king of Judah. His name is King Jehoiakim. Now, King Jehoiakim, he gets overthrown by King Nebuchadnezzar. We all probably have heard that name at some point in our lives, King Nebuchadnezzar. He's the one with the giant statue. If you're a VeggieTales person, he's the guy with the giant bunny, the giant chocolate bunny, if you guys are VeggieTales people. So we're going to be looking at a lot of stories that are probably very familiar to us. But I want us to put this into a different perspective. I want to be very careful how I approach the book of Daniel because it's very easy to get into the book of Daniel and start to draw comparisons where they're not really supposed to be drawn, but I'm going to do my best to try to be careful with how we apply the book of Daniel and how what Israel was going through many, many years ago can apply to you and to me as Christians living in the year of 2024. The entire book of Daniel is focusing on how these people, they have been removed from their land, and they are waiting and praying for their land to be established again. That is what the whole book of Daniel is about, is these Israelites who have been removed from their land who are one day hoping to go back home. They get homesick. And they find themselves under all of these different rulers who step into, one king's getting overthrown by another king. And there's all of these things that are going on throughout their history in the book of Daniel. And what we find is that none of them are really godly rulers. They're all of these outsiders, all of these foreigners who are stepping in to try to tell them how they are going to live as God's people. And we see a lot of stories about how they choose to remain faithful despite all of this, all of these bad policies and these bad kings that they have to serve. If we're being honest, I think that you and I can probably start to see some of the parallels between what they were going through and what we might be going through in today's day and age. What I can't help but think about is how we are kind of, this world is not our home. There's a handful of songs about that if you guys are big into like the worship music and stuff like that. If you like to listen to some of those songs, you've probably heard that phrase that this world is not our home. As Christians, we know that this is not all there is for us. And so, in a similar way to how Daniel and his friends, they were homesick, many of us, we feel homesick as well. Because we look at the stuff that's going on in the world and we just can't help but wait and be so excited for a world that is yet to come where all of these hardships that we endure no longer exist. We feel homesick. Right now, the food that we eat, it kind of tastes like Chef Boyardee, and we're waiting to get to the real good home-cooked meals. We're waiting for things to be better because right now it's just tough. And as we approach this year of 2024, where we're looking at politics and when we're looking at the presidential election and all of these elections that are coming up, and we're thinking about these people who are going to be elected as our leaders, and we're looking at all of these people who are going to have a lot of say in how we live our lives, we probably can't help but feel like Daniel and his friends, and we're like, man, these people are making terrible decisions. And I just want to live a godly life, but it feels like all of these decisions, they're trying to make me be less Christian. You ever feel that way? You watch the stuff that goes on in the news and you see about how this kind of marriage is, we have to accept this kind of marriage, and we see that, these people, they feel this kind of way, and so we have to accept that, and, we have to bring that in and just say that's okay, and that's, how God made them, blah, blah, blah. We have to do this and we have to do that, and it feels like the government is kind of telling us that this is how we have to live. This is the way you're going to live if you're going to be in our country. And they push that out to us. Do you ever read the Bible and you're like, this is not what God would want for me? I think if you feel that way, you're going to find a lot of things similar to Daniel and his friends. We're going to see all of these things get pushed onto them by their government, and they say, you know what? We're going to take a stand, and we're going to stand for this right here and right now based off of how God wants us to live. It's easy to look at it from a political perspective, and so as this series unfolds, and I know this has been a really long introduction, and I'm sorry, but there's a lot of stuff that I want to explain as we move forward with this series. There's going to be a lot of things where I'm going to draw comparisons to the political year and to the political climate of our government. There's going to be a lot of comparisons that I'm just going to kind of show you, but I don't want that to be the emphasis. I talked... if you remember from a month ago, before I left, I talked about how God is sovereign. And we looked at God's sovereignty and how he can accomplish his mission through anybody that he chooses. When we look at the book of Daniel, we are going to see that play out. For the record, the king of Judah gets overthrown because of God's sovereignty. God brings King Nebuchadnezzar in order to punish Israel for their lack of faithfulness to him. So if which This was really crazy. For the record, I can't see the future, but last month when I was talking about like how God is sovereign, I don't know if you guys caught this. I was having lunch, and I think I was eating with Garrett and Danica, and they were like, whoa, Joe Biden just dropped out of the presidential campaign. That happened the same day where I said that God is sovereign and he's going to use who he wants to use. At that time, that hadn't happened yet. We were still thinking that it's Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. That's what we were all thinking. Now we're looking at it as Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. But the truth still remains that God is sovereign and he can work and use who he wants to work through and who he wants to use. We see that throughout the entire book of Daniel. And I get that it might be scary. I get that. And so we're going to draw some of those situations into this sermon series, but I don't want that to be the main focus. I want the main focus of this sermon series to be, how are you as a Christian going to live in a world that doesn't want you to be a Christian? That's what we're going to look at. Because that is the world that Daniel is dealing with. Although they weren't Christian, they were Jews, they followed the God Yahweh. They did not want them to follow that God. And we're going to see how they choose to live in a nation and in different countries with different leaders who hate their views, who want them to just bow down and cave. That's what we're going to see play out. Our first story, now that I've kind of set it up, is in Daniel chapter 1. Now, Daniel chapter 1, we're going to look at this situation. It's the very first situation that we find Daniel and his friends. Now, to kind of set a little bit more of the background, what ended up happening is King Nebuchadnezzar, he overtakes Israel, he overtakes Judah, he's ruling over these people, and he wants to gather all of these wise people. He wants to get all of these people to be good counselors who can come and give him good advice and tell him, really wise things and how he should live, how he should reign, stuff like that. So he gathers all of these people, and amongst these people are Daniel and his friends. So Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, those are these people that get gathered in this group. And King Nebuchadnezzar establishes this nice plan for these people to be well fed, to be well taken care of. And we get into this situation with Daniel and his friends. They're being told, you're going to eat this, you're going to live this way, you're going to do these things. And they say, well, that's not what God would want us to do. And that's where the story picks up. This is Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. It says this. Daniel determined that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine he drank. So he asked permission from the chief eunuch not to defile himself. God had granted Daniel kindness and compassion from the chief eunuch. Yet he said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. What if he sees your faces looking thinner than the other young men your age? You would endanger my life with the king. So Daniel said to the guard whom the chief eunuch had assigned to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then examine our appearance and the appearance of the young men who are eating the king's food, and deal with your servants based on what you see. He agreed with them about this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked better and healthier than all the young men who were eating the king's food. So the guard continued to remove their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. I want to go ahead and pause there real quick. If there's any one thing I can make very clear about this passage, this has nothing to do with a diet. Okay? I want to make that very clear because there are all kinds of books and online articles that you can find where it's like, if you want to revolutionize your body, if you want to change your weight, if you're looking to lose 15 to 20 pounds, try the Daniel diet. That's not what this is about. Now, is eating more vegetables good for you? Sure, probably. But if you really like steak and you really like pork chops, or you want to go and get a pork steak after this, or you want to go and eat chicken, this is not telling you not to do that. Okay, I just want to make that very clear. This has nothing to do with the food that they actually ate. Okay, this has nothing to do with the food that they actually ate. Do you know what this is actually about? This is about the food that they chose not to eat. And I know that sounds like, that sounds like a contradiction to what you just said about the food that they chose to eat. This is not about what they chose to do. It's about what they chose not to do. The key word is not meat. The key word is not wine. The key word is defile. That is the key word. The king wanted them to defile themselves before God in order to be healthy in the king's sight. And they said they would not defile themselves by eating that food. I'm just going to throw it out there. It's quite possible that all of the food that was given was probably food that they regularly could have eaten. It was probably things like beef. It was probably things that they were actually allowed to eat. I'm going to argue that the key difference is that this food was probably sacrificed to the gods of King Nebuchadnezzar and to the gods of these people. And that one thing makes it defile them. And so they say, we're not going to defile ourselves with what you want us to eat. And just as I said earlier, God is sovereign. Did you catch that? God is sovereign. What does it say in verse 9? When Daniel presents this predicament to the chief eunuch and says, I don't want to eat the food that the king wants me to eat. I don't want to defile myself. I don't want to make myself unclean and unholy before God. What does verse 9 say? God had granted Daniel kindness and compassion from the chief eunuch. Did you catch that? Who gave kindness and compassion? Kind of the chief eunuch, but who gave it to the chief eunuch? God instilled it in that chief eunuch. God gave it to him. This was somebody who was looking out for his own skin. This chief eunuch was looking out for himself, for his best interests. He wanted his candidates to be the best looking ones so that he could be honored, and he had no care in the world for the morals of Daniel and his friends. But God used him. God placed kindness and compassion. If you think that God can't use non-Christian people, if you think that God can't use the government, if you think God can't use the politician that you can't stand the most, if you think God can't use them, you don't know God. If you don't think that God can use whoever he wants, you don't know the God that we serve. Our God does what he wants, when he wants, with who he wants. This whole situation is not about the food, it's about the faithfulness of Daniel and his friends. Daniel could have said, just give us food not sacrificed to gods. How about you just bring us the leftovers that weren't used as a sacrifice? He could have done that. He could have said, well, could you include some chicken, or could you include just some regular beef that hasn't been, would you be willing to make sure that everything's kosher for us? Which they didn't have the word kosher back then as far as I know, but you get what I'm saying. Could you just give us kosher food and then test us? No, Daniel went to the extreme. He said, just give us vegetables, put us to the test. But what he really means is put our God to the test. Put our God to the test. See if he will act throughout this whole little experiment. And so the chief eunuch agrees because he saw that within 10 days, which I'm just going to throw it out there, I like diets a lot. I like to research diets. There's very few diets that are going to revolutionarily change your life in 10 days. Again, this is not about the food. This is about their faithfulness to God and how God acts on their faithfulness. And we're going to see the result. Picking up in verse 17, this is what it says. Daniel chapter 1, verse 17, it says this: God gave these 4 young men knowledge and understanding in every kind of literature and wisdom. Daniel also understood visions and dreams of every kind. At the end of the time that the king had said to present them, the chief eunuch presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king interviewed them, and among all of them, no one was found equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they began to attend the king. In every matter of wisdom and understanding that the king consulted them about, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and mediums in his entire kingdom. Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. That has nothing to do with vegetables. It has nothing to do with vegetables. It's not like they were eating all of their carrots and all of their lettuce and all of their salads. And I'm not just saying this because I hate eating salads and stuff. I promise that's not like my intention here. This has nothing to do with eating salads. It's not like they just became super smart because of all of the salads they ate. God chose to bless them and to honor them because of their faithfulness to him. Because they weren't willing to cave on their morals and their principles. Because they weren't willing to bow down to what the government said, God honored them. God rewarded them. And what happens? They get placed in the position right next to the king. And what happens next after they get placed there? The king recognizes that they are 10 times better than all of the other smart people in the kingdom. Why? Well, it's because they ate their salads. They listened to mom. They ate their vegetables, and so they were just 10 times smarter than all of the smartest people on the planet. They took all of the Albert Einsteins, and none of them, they were all 1/10 of as smart as they were because they ate their salads and they ate their vegetables. No. It's because God established them for their faithfulness. God rewarded them for what they had chosen to do. Because they weren't willing to bend their knee, God established them. The point that I want to make for the sermon is this. And we're going to see this theme, this little point, throughout the entire book of Daniel. And it's this: God rewards faithfulness. God rewards faithfulness. Now, here's the little caution that I want to give real quick about this whole God rewards faithfulness. It might not be in the way that you think. Does God reward faithfulness? Yes, absolutely he does. Does it always happen by you becoming the smartest person in the room, or the best looking person in the room, or the strongest person in the room? No, it doesn't. Not always. Could it happen? Sure. If God chooses to use you in that way, he chooses to use you in that way. But he might not. Friends, I tell you the truth. We have already received a reward for our faithfulness. You know how I said that this world is not our home? that we have another home to go to, that's because of faithfulness. We have a place to go to. God has established a place for us, for those who are faithful to Him, for those who have placed their trust and their hope and their faith in Jesus Christ. For those who are faithful to Him, He is faithful to you. He has a place for you to go. He has a place that's free of earthly government. He has a place that's free from sin, a place that's free from pain, a place that's free from death, free from sickness, free from all that ails us now. There's a place for you, and you can be there if you would just be faithful to Him. Because God rewards faithfulness. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day that you've given us. God, I thank you that you reward faithfulness. God, I pray that as we leave these doors, that we would continue to press on towards you, that the faith that we have, we would continue to grow and allow it to develop. God, that we would continue to place our trust and our hope in you and in your Son and in His sacrifice on the cross all those years ago. God, I thank you that we can be saved, not based off of how good we are, not based off of what we choose to do, whether we eat vegetables or not. God, I thank you that you are faithful and you reward us. God, I pray that you would strengthen our faith in you. God, we love you and we thank you. And it's in the name of your Son, Jesus, that we pray. Amen. It feels weird to say as per usual, as if I have been here for the past month. But as per usual, this is the time of invitation. If you have any decisions, any prayer requests that you would like to lift up, decisions to make, any praises that you would like to lift up, this will be the time to do so. I will be forward now that I'm here. And if there's something going on and you don't feel comfortable coming up, you're always welcome to catch me in the back after church. I'd love to just take time to talk to you, pray with you. I've been gone for a month, so there's a lot of pent-up praying that I like that, pent-up praying. There's a lot of pent-up praying that I'm looking forward to doing. So if you have anything that you'd like to talk to me about, this will be the time to do so as the band comes and leads us in one final song.